A poor boy from a tiny mountain village would one day become the most powerful drug lord in history. This is not a dark fairy tale, but the brutal and complex truth of Joaquín Guzmán Loera, a name that would be carved into the annals of global crime. Born into obscurity, in a forgotten corner of the world where opportunity was defined by the horizon and survival was a daily struggle, his destiny seemed set for mediocrity. But within that child was a fire of ambition, a ruthlessness, and a keen intellect that would propel him from the dusty poppy fields of Sinaloa to the apex of a multi-billion-dollar empire. His journey is a study in contradictions, a man who built hospitals and churches while ordering torture and murder, a fugitive from the law who landed on the Forbes list of billionaires, a figure revered as a folk hero by some and despised as a monster by others. This is the story of El Chapo, Shorty, a man of small stature, who cast an impossibly large shadow, one that stretched across two continents and reshaped the very nature of the war on drugs. If you find this story compelling and want to explore more in-depth historical documentaries, please don't forget to take a second to hit that like button, as it truly helps the channel grow. Be sure to press subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a future episode, where we dive deep into the most complex figures and events that have shaped our world. And finally, if you have friends or family who are also interested in true, unvarnished history, please share this video with them. Your support is what allows us to continue making this content. Joaquín Guzmán Loera was born in Tuna, a remote and impoverished hamlet in the municipality of Badurog_U_Otto, Sinaloa, a region long dubbed Mexico's Golden Triangle of drug production. His family was desperately poor, living in a small, simple home without electricity or running water. His father, Emilio Guzmán Bustillos, was officially a cattle rancher, but in reality, he was a gomero, an opium poppy farmer. Guzmán's childhood world was not one of innocence. It was one of hard manual labor and brutal domestic violence. He regularly endured savage beatings from his abusive, alcoholic father, who also reportedly kicked him out of the house as a young boy, forcing him to fend for himself. It was from this harsh environment that the young Joaquín learned his first lessons in survival and the nature of power. Guzmán's ambition grew from this very world of desperation. Growing up, he witnessed the stark contrast between his family's grinding poverty and the flashes of wealth that the drug trade brought to a select few. Dropping out of school after only the 3rd grade to work full-time in the poppy fields, alongside his father, he quickly learned a hard truth. In his world, the only path out of crushing poverty was not through education or legitimate labor, but through the negocio, the business. For Guzmán, the drug trade was not just a job or a career choice, it was the only viable path, the only escape route from a life of destitution. This hunger to escape his origins became the driving force that would shape every decision he made thereafter. Before he was a king, he was a student, and his teacher was the godfather of all Mexican cartels. To enter the world of organized crime, the young Guzmán sought alliances with the most powerful. He began his career under the tutelage of Pedro Aviles Perez, one of the first-generation Sinaloan drug lords who pioneered the use of aircraft to smuggle drugs into the United States. But the true mentor, the real teacher, was Aviles' successor, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, known as El Padrino, the Godfather. Gallardo was a revolutionary. He was the man who transformed Mexico's fragmented drug trade from a collection of independent growers and smugglers into a sophisticated unified criminal syndicate known as the Guadalajara Cartel. In the 1980s, Guzmán worked for Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, taking on what seemed at first to be a modest role. He started as a driver and logistician for the cartel's faction led by Hector El Guerro Palma, another key figure in this story. But Guzmán's role quickly expanded. El Chapo earned a reputation for being efficient, reliable, and ruthless. He wasn't just learning the ropes, he was learning how to build them, protect them, and, most importantly, how to corrupt the government and police officials to ensure they stayed open. He oversaw shipments, coordinated logistics from Colombia to the U.S. border, and meticulously learned the arts of bribery and intimidation that kept Gallardo's empire running smoothly. He was a patient apprentice, Watching Gallardo build an empire through a toxic combination of corruption, violence, and business acumen, Gallardo had unified the various smuggling plaza's territories under a single umbrella. Operating like a CEO of a multinational corporation, he had negotiated directly with Colombian cocaine kingpins like Pablo Escobar. Guzmán watched it all, internalizing how Gallardo turned rivals into partners and government officials into assets. But he also saw the weaknesses. He watched Gallardo's growing arrogance and overconfidence that eventually led to a fatal mistake: the 1985 kidnapping, torture, and brutal murder of D-Agent Kiki Camarena. Guzmán, with the patience of a predator, was waiting for the inevitable moment when his master would fall under the weight of his own empire. When the Guadalajara cartel collapsed following Felix Gallardo's 1989 arrest, its fragments did not simply disappear, they metastasized into warring kingdoms. The Camarena murder had unleashed the full fury of the U.S. government, which shattered the fragile alliance Gallardo had built. From prison, Gallardo attempted to carve up his empire among his top lieutenants. The Arellano Felix brothers took the Tuna Plaza, the Carrillo Fuentes family took Juarez, and Sinaloa was granted to Joaquín Guzmán and his partner, Hector Palma. This balkanization initiated a new era of savage violence, as these new kingdoms immediately began warring with each other for supremacy. Guzmán, having learned from his boss's mistakes, was ready to build an empire of his own from the ashes. Following Gallardo's arrest, Guzmán, Hector Elguero Palma Salazar, and a far more significant, shadowy figure, Ismael Elmeo Zambada Garcia, consolidated their control over the Sinaloan operations. They were not just ex-lieutenants of Gallardo, they formed their own alliance. This was the effective birth of the Sinaloa cartel, though at the time, it was known more as a federation. Unlike Gallardo's centralized, top-down structure, or the tightly controlled family cartels like that of the Arellano Felix brothers, Guzmán's alliance operated more like a federation of independent capos, cooperating to share routes, suppliers, and corruption networks. Guzmán and Elmeo Zambada became the twin leaders of this new organization. The combination of Guzmán's brashness and Zambada's cautious, enigmatic presence creating a formidable force. They didn't just inherit old roots, they innovated. Their goal was not just to participate in the smuggling game, it was to revolutionize it and, ultimately, to control it completely. While their rivals were still relying on traditional methods, Guzmán and Zambada thought bigger. They diversified. They didn't just move Colombia's cocaine. They began producing and moving Mexican heroin and marijuana, and later, pioneered the mass production of methamphetamine. They invested heavily in technology, logistics, and, most importantly, infrastructure. They understood that speed and volume were the keys to dominating the market and becoming the partner of choice for the South American suppliers. While rivals fought on the surface in loud, public gun battles, El Chapo conquered the underworld literally. It was during this early period that he earned his nickname El Rapido, the Speedy One. He promised his Colombian cocaine suppliers that once their product reached Mexico, he could move it across the U.S. border within 48 hours, a speed his competitors couldn't match. This efficiency made him the preferred smuggling partner, allowing him to negotiate better terms and earn larger profits. But his true innovation, the one that would become the stuff of legend, was being built right beneath his rivals and the authorities' feet. Guzmán pioneered the use of sophisticated, air-conditioned tunnels under the U.S.-Mexico border, a tactic that fundamentally changed the smuggling game. These were not simple gopher holes, they were feats of engineering. His first notable tunnel, discovered in 1990, connected a house in Agua Prieta, Sonora, to a warehouse in Douglas, Arizona. It was activated by a hidden hydraulic mechanism under a pool table. Later tunnels would become even more complex, featuring ventilation systems, electrical lighting, and miniature railway systems. With carts to move tons of cocaine, marijuana, and other drugs efficiently, Guzmán had turned an ancient art of smuggling into an industrial science. How do you control a nation while running an illegal enterprise? You offer two choices, and only two choices: plata silver or plomo lead. Silver represented the endless wealth that could come from bribery, and lead represented the assassin's bullet. This simple but brutal binary philosophy, though often attributed to Pablo Escobar, was adopted and perfected by Guzmán and the Mexican cartels. It was an offer that couldn't be refused. The choice was simple: accept a life-changing bribe and turn a blind eye, or even actively assist the cartel's operations, or refuse and face the deadly consequences, often for both you and your family. This was Guzmán's core strategy, and he wielded it with devastating effectiveness. He spent billions of dollars to co-opt every level of Mexican society. Plata bought the loyalty of local police, officers, high-ranking military commanders, prosecutors, judges, and politicians up to the highest levels of government. It wasn't just bribery. It was systematic co-option. He created a shadow state that ran parallel to the legitimate government, a vast, corrupt bureaucracy loyal not to the nation, but to the Sinaloa cartel's payroll. This shadow state provided intelligence, protection, armed escorts, and legal immunity, making his empire virtually untouchable for those brave or foolish enough to refuse the silver. The alternative was swift and horrific. The lead was distributed without hesitation. Journalists who exposed his operations were assassinated. Honest politicians who ran on anti-corruption platforms were gunned down. Police commanders who refused to cooperate were brutally murdered, their bodies often left in public as gruesome warnings to others. This brutal efficiency, the certainty of the consequence, paralyzed the very institutions that were supposed to fight him. Fear became a tool of control more powerful than greed, allowing his empire to operate with near-total impunity for decades. El Chapo's ambition was not limited to Mexico. He was not just a smuggler, he was a global logistician. He built an international logistics network that rivaled, if not surpassed, in its scope and efficiency, legitimate corporations like Amazon or FedEx. He understood that the real power lay not in producing the drugs, but in the ability to move them from point A to point B reliably. His empire stretched from the Andean mountains of Colombia, where he sourced his cocaine, to the super labs in Mexico, where he manufactured methamphetamine, and then out to markets in North America, Europe, Asia, and Australia. The Sinaloa cartel became a true multinational criminal corporation, a global enterprise with operations in over 50 countries. They used every conceivable method: container ships moving tons of drugs hidden in legitimate cargo, fleets of fishing vessels, private jets, semi-submersible submarines, and of course, the tunnels. They established hubs in West Africa for trans-shipping narcotics into Europe. They partnered with local gangs in Chicago, turning it into their primary distribution center in the United States. They even penetrated the lucrative Australian market, where cocaine and methamphetamine prices are sky-high. As his empire grew, so did his wars. To secure his place as the king, he had to eliminate the rival kings. He waged bloody wars against his former colleagues from the Guadalajara cartel. The most vicious was against the Arellano Felix brothers of the Tuna cartel, who controlled the lucrative smuggling route into California. Their conflict culminated in a disastrous 1993 shootout at the Guadalajara airport, where their gunmen, in an attempt to assassinate Guzmán, accidentally murdered Cardinal Juan Jesus Posadas Ocampo, an event that shocked Mexico and brought massive government heat down on both cartels. He also fought the Juarez cartel for control of the routes into Texas, helping turn Ciudad Juarez into one of the most violent cities on the planet. In 1993, following the infamous Cardinal's assassination, the international and domestic pressure became too much. The law finally caught up with Guzmán in Guatemala, where he had fled. Captured and extradited back to Mexico, many thought this was the end for El Chapo. But for Guzmán, prison was not an end. It was just a new venue for doing business. For a man with limitless resources and a vast network of corruption, prison walls were merely an inconvenience, a cost of doing business. Sentenced to 20 years, he was sent to the maximum security prison, Punta Grande, in Jalisco. Its nickname among inmates was Puerta Grande, the Big Door, because of the rampant corruption. Guzmán, using his tried and true Plata strategy, quickly turned his cell into a palace and the prison into his new operational headquarters. He bribed guards, wardens, and high-level officials. He was given access to custom-made meals, contraband alcohol, cell phones, internet access, and unlimited conjugal visits. including hosting lavish parties with female inmates and prostitutes brought in from outside. He had contraband, hosted parties, and controlled his empire from inside. He coordinated drug shipments, ordered the murders of rivals, and continued his cartel wars, all from the relative safety of his cell. The prison officials, including the warden, effectively became his employees. The prison was not his cage, it was his new headquarters, a government-protected fortress where his rivals couldn't get to him. He effectively ran the prison, and by extension, his empire. After 8 years in his prison palace, El Chapo decided it was time to leave. The reason for the sudden change: growing rumors of a potential extradition to the United States. A new government had taken power in Mexico, and the pressure from the U.S. was mounting. Guzmán knew that in an American prison, his plata would be useless. He could not bribe the U.S. justice system the way he had the Mexican one. Faced with the prospect of a real prison cell, he activated his exit plan, and his method, when it was revealed, was humiliatingly simple. On January 19, 2001, Joaquín Guzmán Loera vanished from Puente Grande. The official story, or at least the legendary one, is that he escaped by hiding inside a laundry cart. With the help of a bribed prison maintenance worker named Francisco El Chito Cambros, Salazar Guzmán allegedly climbed into a pile of dirty laundry and was wheeled through multiple security doors, past guards paid to look the other way, and out the front gate to freedom. While the veracity of the laundry cart detail is disputed, some argue he simply walked out dressed in a police uniform. The message was clear: he was gone. Over 70 prison officials, including the warden, were ultimately implicated in the brazen escape. It was not the act of a few corrupt guards, it was a systemic, orchestrated failure of security, bought and paid for with an estimated $2.5 million in bribes. The escape transformed Guzmán from a notorious drug lord into a living legend. He became a global fugitive, a symbol of the Mexican state's impotence and corruption, and the #1 target for the D and U.S. law enforcement. After 13 years on the run, during which his power and that of the Sinaloa cartel only grew, Guzmán was finally recaptured in February 2014 at a seaside condo in Mazatlan. Humbled by the 2001 escape, the Mexican government was determined this time to prove it could hold him. They sent him to Altiplano, the country's most secure federal prison, a supposedly escape-proof facility designed to hold its most dangerous criminals. They paraded him before the cameras, a trophy of the state's newfound resolve. But Altiplano held him for less than 1.5 years. On July 11, 2015, the world was stunned to learn that Joaquín Guzmán had done it again. In the evening, security cameras in his cell showed him walking to his shower area, a small blind spot designed to afford inmates privacy. He ducked down, and then he was gone. He had slipped into a small, precisely cut hole in the shower floor. That hole led to a 30-foot vertical shaft, which in turn connected to a 1-mile-long, ventilated, and lit tunnel, tall enough for a man to walk upright, that ran to a half-constructed house in the middle of a field. This tunnel was not an impromptu dig. It was a marvel of engineering and corruption. It was equipped with a ventilation system, electrical lighting, and even a modified motorcycle on rails used to transport tools, remove dirt, and provide for Guzmán's quick getaway. It had taken months, if not a year, to build, requiring the exact GPS coordinates of his cell, the prison's blueprints, and total complicity from within to mask the noise and activity. This escape was an absolute humiliation, an act of breathtaking audacity that proved definitively that no prison in Mexico could hold him. To the outside world, to the U.S. and Mexican governments, and to the countless victims of the drug wars, he was a monster, a purveyor of death, a mastermind of violence who had plunged his country into a bloodbath. But in his home state of Sinaloa, particularly in the poor, mountainous regions from which he came, many ordinary people viewed Joaquín Guzmán through a very different lens. To them, he was not a criminal, but a modern-day Robin Hood, a social bandit who took from the rich, or at least the Americans, and gave to the local poor. This myth was not without basis. Though it was a calculated public relations strategy, Guzmán poured money back into his community. He was known to pay for roads to be paved in remote villages, to build churches, and to sponsor local festivals. He provided jobs in an economy that offered none. He offered basic social services that an absent or corrupt government failed or refused to provide. When he would visit a restaurant, he would have his bodyguards collect everyone's cell phones, and then at the end, he would pay for everyone's meal. The social bandit myth built a powerful wall of loyalty around him, a wall more effective than any army of bodyguards. The people of the mountains, who benefited from his largesse and saw him as one of their own, protected him. They were his eyes and ears when the Mexican Marines, the only force the government trusted enough to hunt him, conducted raids in his mountain strongholds. He always seemed to vanish minutes before they arrived. Word of troop movements would be relayed via simple radios and cell phones from village to village, making him effectively invisible to the authorities. But the Robin Hood myth was just that, a mask, a carefully crafted PR tool to obscure a far more brutal reality. Beneath the veneer of the benevolent patron was a ruthless enforcer, a businessman who had built his empire on addiction and despair, and who protected his profits by bathing Mexico in a sea of blood. His generosity was funded by the billions of dollars earned from trafficking poison into communities around the world. The peace he brought to Sinaloa was a pax narcotica, a peace imposed by the gun, maintained by fear. Guzmán waged savage wars against rival cartels and against the Mexican state itself. His rivalry with gangs like Los Zetas and the Beltran Leyva cartel led to unprecedented levels of public violence, broad daylight shootouts, public beheadings, and bodies hung from highway overpasses as gruesome warnings. His organization is linked to tens of thousands of murders, contributing to the staggering death toll of the Mexican drug war, a conflict that has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and left tens of thousands more disappeared. Betrayal, or even the mere suspicion of disloyalty, was met with unspeakable violence. Victims were tortured, dismembered, and dissolved in barrels of acid by Pajueleros stewmakers. This terror was not random. It was purposeful. It was a message to rivals, to the government, and to his own subordinates. It was this terror, not loyalty or love, that was the true foundation of his control. Loyalty was bought with plata, and compliance was ensured with plomo. For El Chapo, blood was everything. He was building more than an empire. He was building a dynasty. Like a medieval king, he saw the cartel as more than just a business, but as his family's legacy. He had multiple wives and mistresses, and fathered countless children, but a select few of his sons were chosen and groomed to take over the family business. He famously married Emma Coronel Espero, a teenage beauty queen, in 2007. While he was still a fugitive, his sons, known collectively as Los Chapitos, the Little Shorties, were groomed from a young age to inherit the empire. The sons from his previous marriages, notably Ivan Archivaldo and Jesus Alfredo, often called Los Alfredos, and later Ovidio and Joaquin from his relationship with Griselda Lépez Pérez, were integrated into the cartel's operations. They grew up with unimaginable wealth, but also with the brutal pressures of the negocio. They were not just narco juniors flaunting their wealth on Instagram. They were the next generation of leadership. This new generation, Los Chapitos, is reportedly even more violent and volatile than their father. While El Chapo was a master logistician of cocaine and heroin, his sons shifted the business focus to a far more profitable and far more deadly drug, fentanyl. They pioneered the mass production of the synthetic opioid, using precursor chemicals imported from China to press billions of counterfeit pills, fueling a devastating overdose crisis in the United States. They continue their father's bloody legacy as evidenced by the 2019 Culiacanazo, where cartel gunmen laid siege to the city of Culiacan and forced the Mexican government to release Ovidio after a brief arrest, an absolute humiliation of the state. How was the world's most wanted man, a master of escape and evasion, finally caught? In a strange twist of fate, it was his own ego, his hubris, and his desire for immortality that led to his downfall. After his 2015 escape from Altiplano, Guzmán was the most hunted man on the planet. He was hiding in his mountain strongholds in Sinaloa, virtually untouchable. But he had an obsession. He wanted his story told. While on the run, Joaquín Guzmán secretly met with Hollywood actor Sean Penn and Mexican actress Kate del Castillo. The reason? He wanted to make a biographical movie about his life. He had reached out to del Castillo after she posted a seemingly sympathetic tweet, and she helped broker the meeting with Penn, who later wrote a controversial article for Rolling Stone magazine. They traveled to a remote jungle clearing, drank tequila, and talked for hours. It was this incredible act of hubris, this braggadocio, that gave authorities, with crucial U.S. intelligence support, the electronic trail they needed, the communications to arrange the meeting, cell phones, encrypted messages. Emails created a digital breadcrumb trail that intelligence agencies followed relentlessly. They tracked him from his mountain hideout to a safe house in the coastal city of Los Mochis, Sinaloa. On January 8, 2016, Mexican Marines raided the house. After a fierce firefight, Guzmán escaped yet again through another tunnel, this one connecting to the city's sewer system. But this time, his luck had run out. Filthy, wet, and exhausted, he and a top gunman emerged from a manhole, carjacked a vehicle, and were soon after captured by federal police on a nearby highway. Mexico could not hold him. Two escapes had proven that in humiliating fashion. The United States, the primary market for his drugs, and the nation whose agent Kiki Camarena he had helped murder decades prior, was determined to bring him to its justice. This time, there would be no delay. The legal processes were fast-tracked. On January 19, 2017, just hours before President Barack Obama left office, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán was extradited. He was put on a U.S. government plane and flown to New York to face the justice system he had always feared. His trial in Brooklyn in late 2018 and early 2019 was a massive media spectacle. Dubbed the trial of the century, security was unprecedented, with anonymous jurors and the Brooklyn Bridge being shut down each day as he was transported from a high-security jail in Manhattan. For over 3 months, prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, dozens of former associates, smugglers, gunmen, and even a mistress lined up to testify against their former boss. They told stories of multi-ton cocaine shipments, brutal murders, million-dollar bribes to officials, and the legendary tunnels. In February 2019, after a long trial, the jury took less than a week to deliberate. Joaquín Guzmán Loera was found guilty on all 10 counts, including running a continuing criminal enterprise, money laundering, and numerous drug trafficking charges. The verdict was inevitable. Months later, he was sentenced to the mandatory life in prison plus a symbolic 30 years, with no possibility of parole. He was also ordered to forfeit $12.6 billion, a conservative estimate of his illicit profits. Joaquín Guzmán now resides in a prison designed specifically to hold people the normal system cannot. It is the Administrative Maximum Facility ADX Florence in Colorado, the only federal supermax prison in the United States. It is known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, a prison built for total isolation, to cut its inmates off from the outside world and from each other. It is home to terrorists like Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, and Ramzi Youssef 1993 World Trade Center bombing. He is at ADX Florence, a supermax prison, which is designed for total isolation. He reportedly spends 23 hours a day in a small, soundproof, concrete cell. Everything in the cell, from the bed to the desk to the stool, is made of poured concrete. He eats all his meals alone in his cell. His recreation consists of 1 hour a day in an outdoor concrete cage, slightly larger than his cell, where he can see a sliver of the sky. He has no contact with other inmates. For a man who ran a global empire and bought an entire system, this is the end, entombed alive in a concrete box. The Kingpin is caged, but the empire remains. The capture and conviction of El Chapo was a symbolic victory, but it did little to stem the flow of drugs. The Kingpin strategy had, once again, failed to break the business. The Sinaloa cartel, now run by an uneasy alliance between the old guard El Mayo Zambada, who has never been captured, and the volatile Los Chapitos, continues to thrive. They remain one of the most powerful and violent drug trafficking organizations on Earth, continuing to poison the world, now with a deadly focus on fentanyl. El Chapo's story is over, but his bloody legacy and the war he helped create continues unabated.